Good morning. I guess we'll go ahead and get started. I'm sure we'll have a few more people coming in. So this is session 3, Intervention Strategies for Post-Harvest Loss Mitigation. My name is Elizabeth Mitcham. I'm from the University of California, Davis, where I serve as the director of the Postharvest Technology Center and also the Horticulture Innovation Lab. It's my pleasure to moderate this session this morning. Also will be given a talk later. This session actually has a mixture of topics related to mitigating post-harvest losses, including some overviews of programs and approaches that are addressing post-harvest loss at a broad scale level. Then we're going to hear a little bit about pest management, which is really critical after harvest. And then a couple of the talks will address issues related to adoption of good post-harvest practices and some of the barriers that exist to that adoption. So it should be an interesting session. And it's my pleasure to introduce the first speaker, Dr. John Bowman, who is a senior agriculture officer with the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID. He is in charge of a range of portfolios, research portfolios at USAID, including the Horticulture Innovation Lab, so essentially John's my boss. But he is going to give us a presentation to start off this session about the role of post-harvest loss reduction, as he is in charge of the post-harvest portfolio at USAID, and talk to us about how that relates to the Feed the Future initiative. So, John, please.
Okay, well, good morning, everybody. I'm going to have to go through what we do in kind of a rapid-fire approach. We're doing a lot of things. I wish we could invest even more funding, but in the last 5 years, we've tried to really up our game in the post-harvest area at USAID Feed the Future. I'm going to essentially talk a little bit about the Feed the Future program, because there may be some of you don't know too much about it. Then I'll delve more into the details of our ag research program at Feed the Future, and then delve even further into our post-harvest loss portfolio and the important role it's starting to take. Then if I have time, I want to address some of the issues that were raised during C.D. Glynn's presentation yesterday from the Rockefeller Foundation. I found some of the questions and discussion points pretty interesting, so hopefully if I have time, I'll get into some of those points. I think most of you are familiar with this huge task we have, this global food insecurity situation that came about with the grain price hikes in 2008, 2009, and I think most of you are aware of these FAO statistics. We have to realize these huge increases in food production for a population that's going to exceed 9 billion by 2050. And so the Feed the Future program was the U.S. government response to this challenge. Aside from those FAO figures, this is one figure I want to leave you with an important impression, that over 900 million people are suffering from chronic hunger, and each year over 3 million children dying from undernutrition. So we are really trying to attack this particular problem of hunger and child death through our interventions. What does Feed the Future do? Well, we're all about more food, better access to food, regional trade, policy, and better policy environment for food security. But I did want to stress the point that essentially, I think most of us in the room here are either ag researchers or related to ag research. And essentially, Feed the Future has become a renaissance for agricultural research and development under Feed the Future. It's an extremely important point. And the other point is that most of our agricultural interventions are now tasked with having a nutrition outcome, which is very different from most of our agricultural interventions in the past 20, 30 years. We're in about 20 countries. I think most of you know the Feed the Future countries. I won't go throughout the entire list. What's kind of new is that Myanmar or Burma is on the verge of becoming a Feed the Future country, as is Guinea in West Africa. We have a pretty comprehensive and detailed monitoring and evaluation system for Feed the Future. And this system, when you just look at the 12-month swath of our fiscal year 2013, you can see that we, through our various programming, reached millions of farmers on millions of hectares. We leveraged over $160 million in private sector investment. But one of the most important figures is that we reached more than 12.5 million children who are suffering from malnutrition. And some of that was agricultural intervention, and some of it was pure nutrition and health interventions. But I did want to stress that point of our nutrition gains. Now, the Feed the Future research portfolio was designed in the first year of implementation. It took kind of a year to design. The research pillars of Feed the Future involve advancing the productivity frontier, sustainable intensification, and nutrition and food safety. The problem with this in terms of the post-harvest community is that these first two pillars, there's very little. These are the big drivers of Feed the Future research in terms of where most of the funding is involved, and there's not much going on there in the post-harvest loss area. Most of the post-harvest loss interventions we categorize under this third pillar called nutrition and food safety. The research portfolio is active in 4 major agroecosystems. I'll just quickly list them here. We're focused in the Indo-Gangetic plains of South Asia, in the Sudano-Sahel, West Africa, Central Africa, the mixed maize systems of East and South Africa, and then we're also focused on the Ethiopian highlands. There are 3 major ways in which we implement ag research at Feed the Future. One is through our innovation labs, which are led by U.S. universities, U.S. land-grant universities. These are formerly known as CRISPs, but now they're called innovation labs. And I've tried to highlight here the labs which are most involved in delivering content in post-harvest loss reduction. So this would be the new Purdue University Food Processing Post-Harvest Lab, the Kansas State University Reduction of Post-Harvest Loss Lab, and Horticulture Innovation Lab at UC Davis. Also our peanut mycotoxin lab at University of Georgia, doing a lot of work in aflatoxin, mycotoxin, which is essentially post-harvest content as well. We also make major investments into the CGIAR system and into international research centers that are aligned with the CGIAR, such as AVRDC, ECPE, and ECMOD. And the third major arm of our support is we have a whole suite of biotechnology projects. Some of these biotechnology projects do involve post-harvest content, such as we work on BT cowpea, and that's a genetically modified cowpea that is mitigating storage pests. We also work on genetically modified potato to combat late blight, which is not only a field disease of potato, but also an important storage problem. Our whole research portfolio is divided into these 6 or 7 program areas. And again, the one that has the most content in post-harvest is the one that I manage, called Nutritious and Safe Foods. You can all get this presentation, so I've essentially, in the Nutrition and Safe Food program areas, I've got a listing here of our major investments in post-harvest area. The horticulture lab run by UC Davis, post-harvest lab, I've already mentioned these, and normally in a presentation where I had more time, I could go into a little bit more discussion of each lab and its content, but most of our implementers are here, and you can meet with them during the conference and get more answers to questions. And I don't have all the time to address them in this talk. I'll quickly just mention some of the most important and significant collaborations and outcomes we've had in post-harvest. We've had major collaboration between AVRDC and the the Horticulture Innovation Lab. Horticulture Lab set up a post-harvest training and service center in Tanzania in collaboration with AVRDC, and trained several years ago, trained dozens of trainees from all around Africa in essentially post-harvest practices and technologies. Another major collaboration we had between AVRDC and the Horticulture Innovation Lab was in the pursuit of, sorry, I've jumped ahead. First, let me describe the AVRDC standalone post-harvest project, which we inaugurated about 2 years ago. So it's operative in 3 Asian countries and 3 African countries, and essentially has done a lot of value chain analysis focusing on post-harvest gaps, and then quantifying losses, and also identifying the highest priority opportunities for intervention. And in its last 2 years, it will essentially actively pick some of these interventions and work on them in these 6 countries. Another significant collaboration we had was between the Horticulture Lab and AVRDC, a medical project called AMPATH, and our field office value chain project in horticulture in Kenya. This was all about African indigenous vegetable production by Kenyan farmers. Most of the communities were affected by HIV. We used AVRDC superior varieties of these indigenous vegetables. The horticulture lab team developed best agronomic practices, and then we linked up with this value chain project and worked on drying and storage and processing of these African indigenous vegetables for export into Europe. And so essentially, these HIV-affected farmers became outgrowers attached to a company that had a major processing and post-harvest outcome for these highly nutritious vegetables. Our other projects typically look at a variety of the technologies, such as solar grain dryers, developed in collaboration with Erie, Hohenheim University, GrainPro. We're doing all kinds of different comparative analyses on hermetic storage systems, such as the PICS bags, GrainPro super bags, and also galvanized steel hermetic systems. And our food processing innovation lab at Purdue is, in addition to look at some of these technologies, they are focused on sorghum and millet processing into highly nutritious foods, combining, again, the whole idea is to get the countries where they're focused. They're currently focused on Kenya and Senegal, and they're getting these foods essentially high degree of processing for local entrepreneurs so they can avoid all the constraints and problems of storage. And they're combining essentially the sorghum and millet base with African indigenous vegetables to add nutrition to create a range of products such as weaning foods and porridges. And they're using an incubation center model, which they previously developed in Mali and Niger. These are just some quick examples. We have a full suite of aflatoxin projects now, which fall under the rubric of post-harvest loss. I just don't have the time to get through all of them, but some of the most innovative work that we're doing is with the Nutrition Innovation Lab that's led by Tufts, where we're building an evidence base through blood and urine sampling of mothers, and then following aflatoxin levels in the blood and urine into the babies, and then trying to correlate birth outcomes with actual aflatoxin level in blood and urine. This will build the evidence base that so many people are wanting for aflatoxin work, and if the base continues to build, we will then have more and more funding, we think, for all kinds of interventions in aflatoxin, mycotoxin, including post-harvest interventions. We also fund breeding efforts to mitigate aflatoxin, conventional breeding, marker-assisted breeding, and we work with a private sector firm called Venganza in what's called RNAi breeding. Also, we're very supportive of the AflaSafe technology, which has been developed by USDA and IITA Our field offices have invested in this technology, and we will continue to invest in this technology in partnership with the Gates Foundation. These again, are just a list of some of the most important gains we've made in post-harvest loss reduction under the Feed the Future since the start of 2010. I'm just back of the envelope calculating that we've put, somewhere in the ballpark of 150 million in these 5 years into really significant post-harvest loss work. I did want to just stress, though, that in addition to all the technological interventions, both through the research office and through our field missions, we've also now started to work in established communities of practice with FAO, Gates, State Department, USDA, and we're starting to, sponsor international conferences in the post-harvest area, such as this one. Okay, I guess I've...
1 minute left, that's your question.
Okay, I just did want to quickly address some of the issues that were brought up, important issues that were brought up in yesterday's talk by C.D. Glynn. The competition for research dollars, this came up, our problem, our constraint in Feed the Future ag research is that it's really dominated by the front end of the value chain. The biggest pressing, the big dogs in the room that are getting most of the funding are sustainable intensification, which is essentially all about cropping systems, not so much about post-harvest, and climate-smart agriculture, which we have a lot of projects that are now funded essentially to breed for climate resiliency in grains. So those areas are dominating. So anything we do in post-harvest is going to be looked at very carefully. We have to make our investments very selectively. The question also came up about how to involve the government in what we do. In Feed the Future, we work, our field missions are in direct contact with host country governments. All of our projects are essentially, in Feed the Future, we try to have host country ownership to a high degree of most of our interventions, and that includes the research interventions. So State Department leads on making sure that our relationship between the AID offices and the embassies are highly aligned with the host country governments. We only work in certain zones of influence in these focal countries, and those zones of influence are picked in collaboration with the host country government. So we're only really working where the governments want us to work. And for example, in the case of Rwanda, Rwanda specifically the government had a high degree of interest in post-harvest handling, so we actually funded a standalone post-harvest handling and management project out of our field office in Rwanda. More and more in Kenya, Kenya's become more and more interested in aflatoxin, and we're responding to aflatoxin for the government of Kenya. Tanzania, we had major investments in the horticulture value chain in Tanzania out of our field office, but they were quite deficient in the area of post-harvest loss management. So we covered that particular area of the horticulture value chain through our research office. I don't quite have the time. I wanted to talk more about scaling and research innovation, but my time is up, and I'll try to get to that issue in some other time I have in some of the other sessions, like, for example, the panel discussion. I'm just trying to get to my thank you slide. This thing is a little bit stuck. Thank you very much for your attention. Please visit the Feed the Future website.
Thank you, John. As always, lots of information. I'm sorry we don't have time for questions, but you all recognize John as this tall man here in the dark suit, so look for him during the lunch break and ask your questions. Okay, so